Harlem hears the new name before it sees the man. Not shouted past like contraband, low and careful. A dealer laughs too loud, a rival tests a corner, and everyone expects gunfire. Then Bumpy Johnson steps into view, quiet as a verdict, and the whole street starts listening. Harlem didn't learn his face first. It learned the pause his name created. Men on the corner would be laughing, passing news like cards until someone said it low, like a prayer they didn't trust. Then the laughter thinned. Not fear exactly. Something older, something careful. Bumpy Johnson, not shouted, never shouted. A name like that didn't need volume. Shopkeepers heard it through half-opened doors. Mothers heard it while tying a child's coat. Lookouts heard it and sat a little straighter, as if the street itself had just been reminded who it belonged to. Because in Harlem, power wasn't only the gun. Power was the ability to walk into a place and make men stop pretending. That morning, the block looked ordinary, carts rolling, voices calling, a broom scraping a stoop clean. But behind the ordinary, there was a quiet accounting. Who owed who? Who took too much? Who spoke too freely last week? Harlem always kept its own books, and then he came. No parade, no pack of loud men orbiting him. Just Bumpy Johnson in a dark suit that fit like a decision. Hat set right, hands empty, steps measured, like he wasn't arriving, he was returning. A few heads turned, then more. Not because he demanded attention, because the street offered it. A man carrying crates slowed down without knowing why. Two boys stopped their game. A woman at the window leaned forward, not to gossip, but to witness. Bumpy didn't scan the block like prey. He didn't smirk. He didn't rush. His eyes were calm, fixed ahead, as if Harlem itself had already been met and judged, and found worthy of his silence. A man across the street whispered to his friend, trying to sound brave. "That him?" The friend didn't answer right away. He watched Bumpy pass like a storm that doesn't need rain to ruin your day. Finally he said, "Yeah." Then, softer, like warning a child away from a hot stove, "Don't stare too long." Bumpy kept walking, and the block made room. Not because anyone told it to, because Harlem had already heard the name. Harlem wasn't a place that tolerated mistakes for long. It forgave hunger. It forgave anger. It even forgave small sins done to survive. But it never forgave disrespect. Respect was the first currency here, passed hand to hand, collected quietly, spent carefully. A man could be poor and still be treated like a king if he carried himself with restraint. A man could have money and still be a ghost if he talked too much. The street decided, always, and the street watched Bumpy Johnson the way it watched a new preacher, not to be entertained, but to measure if the soul was real. He moved through the neighborhood like he understood its weight, not just the corners and the buildings, the people. The old men who sat outside like they were part of the sidewalk. The women who ran kitchens and kept whole families upright. The boys who learned the rules too early and tried to pretend it was play. Bumpy didn't rush past them. He tipped his head to an elder on the stoop, just enough to show it wasn't theater. The elder nodded back, slow and firm. That exchange, small as it looked, was Harlem's true introduction. Because the neighborhood knew something, any man can collect fear. Only a certain kind of man collects loyalty. A runner crossed the street and slipped close, talking without looking up. Words stayed hidden between them. Bumpy listened the way stone listens to rain, without reaction, without complaint. Then he spoke a few low syllables, and the runner's shoulders loosened, as if a verdict had been delivered. Further down, the storefronts carried their own stories. A butcher who'd paid too many taxes to too many loud men. A barber shop that heard every rumor before it became a headline. A number spot that kept families fed when the city kept its hand in their pocket. Bumpy didn't need to announce control. Control was shown by what didn't happen. No shouting when he passed, no sudden scurrying. No men pretending they weren't watching. People simply adjusted like a room does when a judge enters. Across Lenox, a young hardhead leaned against a pole, chin up, eyes hard, the kind of boy who believed courage was volume. He stared at Bumpy like a challenge. Bumpy didn't look back. Not because he was afraid to meet the stare, because meeting it would have been a gift. Attention was a reward, and Harlem learned quick that Bumpy didn't pay out rewards for foolishness. The boy's friends tugged him away anyway, quick hands, urgent whispers. The boy resisted for half a second, then let himself be moved, confused by his own fear. That's what Harlem noticed. Bumpy's power wasn't the threat of violence. It was the certainty that violence was never the point. He was building something older than fear, something the neighborhood could stand on. And as he walked, Harlem walked with him, quietly, as if the community itself was deciding, this man doesn't just survive here, he belongs here. They never started with a bullet. Not with a man like Bumpy. The first test was always dressed up like business, like manners, like something you could deny later if it went wrong. A harmless question, a harmless offer, a harmless insult tucked inside a smile. That afternoon, the message came through a familiar face, one of those men who drifted between crews, the way smoke drifts between rooms. He found Bumpy outside a back entrance where the street noise softened and the shadows did their work. He didn't approach like an enemy. He approached like a messenger who wanted to live. "Mr. Johnson," he said, polite enough to sound rehearsed, "I was told to speak to you." Bumpy's eyes stayed on him, steady, unreadable, not hostile, just present. The messenger felt it. Every man did the sensation of being fully seen. "Speak," Bumpy said. The man cleared his throat. He tried to keep his voice calm, but it came out tight around the edges. "There's talk. About territory. About who's handling what and where." Bumpy didn't move. He didn't lean in. He didn't step back. He let the silence stretch until the messenger's words began to feel thin. "And?" Bumpy asked. The messenger swallowed. "They're offering you a partnership. They say it's better for everyone. Less trouble, less noise." Bumpy's mouth didn't change shape, but something in his stillness sharpened, like a door quietly locking. "Who's they?" he asked. The messenger hesitated, just a blink too long. Bumpy nodded once like he'd been handed a receipt. "They want you to take the offer," the messenger said quickly, rushing now, trying to outrun his own fear. "They say you can keep your pride. They say it's respect." Bumpy looked past him for a moment, down the alley mouth to the street beyond, where Harlem kept living like it always did. Children calling, women bargaining, men pretending they weren't listening. Then Bumpy returned his eyes to the messenger. "Respect," he repeated softly. The messenger forced a laugh, weak as paper. "That's what they said." Bumpy's voice stayed calm. "And what did they send you with besides words?" The messenger's hands twitched. He didn't want to answer. Bumpy waited. Finally, the man pulled a folded paper from his coat. It was clean, typed, a neat list of numbers and times and places. An arrangement, a schedule, a cage built out of courtesy. Bumpy took the paper without haste and read it like he was reading the weather. Then he handed it back. The messenger blinked. You don't want to keep it?" Bumpy's gaze didn't lift. "I don't keep other men's plans." The messenger wet his lips. "So what do I tell them?" Bumpy stepped closer, not fast, not dramatic. Just enough that the messenger could smell his cologne, could feel the air tighten. "You tell them," Bumpy said low and even, "that Harlem don't get divided like meat." The messenger's eyes widened. He started to speak, to bargain, to soften it. Bumpy cut him off with the smallest shake of his head. "And you tell them something else," he added. "Next time they want to send respect, they send it themselves." The messenger nodded too many times. "Yes, sir. Yes." He backed away, already thinking about how to survive the report he had to deliver. Bumpy watched him go, expression unchanged. Because the trap wasn't the offer. The trap was what the offer revealed. Someone believed Bumpy Johnson could be managed. And now, Harlem would learn how wrong that was. They chose noon on purpose. Daylight made men reckless. It made them believe witnesses were armor. A crowded street could turn consequence into hesitation. It could make a strong man think twice because too many eyes meant too many stories. That was their plan. They set it on a busy stretch where Harlem breathed, loud vendors calling out prices, shoes tapping pavement, radios humming behind open windows, the kind of block where news traveled faster than footsteps, where a scene became legend before it even ended. Bumpy arrived, like he always did. Not early, not late. On time. Dark suit pressed clean, hat sitting right. No rushed movements, no extra men creating noise behind him, just his calm walking into the middle of their intention. And Harlem felt it. You could see the shift small but real, conversations thinning, smiles fading, hands pausing mid-gesture, men leaning back against brick, acting casual, failing at it. Across the street, the rival's mouthpiece waited with a grin that belonged in a different neighborhood. He was dressed well. Too well, like he wanted the crowd to mistake him for authority. 2 men flanked him. Wide shoulders, quiet eyes. Not policemen. Not civilians. The kind of men who carried weight without needing to show the tool they used. When Bumpy got close, the mouthpiece stepped forward. Loud enough to make sure every ear could collect the words. "Bumpy Johnson," he said, like he was calling a dog off a porch. That alone was the insult. Names in Harlem weren't thrown around like coins. A man's name was his spine. You spoke it with care, or you didn't speak it at all. The crowd stiffened. Somebody's cartwheel stopped squeaking. A child's laughter died mid-breath. The mouthpiece smiled wider, tasting the tension. "Heard you don't like paperwork," he said, tapping a folded sheet in his hand like it was a badge. "So we thought we'd bring the deal to you. In person, in front of everybody." His men chuckled small and controlled, like they'd practiced the sound. Bumpy didn't react. He didn't glance at the paper. He didn't glance at the men. He looked at the mouthpiece the way a judge looks at a man already found guilty. The mouthpiece's grin twitched for half a second because that look didn't ask questions. It didn't negotiate. It simply measured how much mercy the moment deserved. Still, he kept going, feeding on the crowd. "You got your little corners," he said, voice climbing. "We ain't trying to take food out your mouth. We're offering you peace." He held the word peace like a joke. "All you gotta do," he continued, "is stop acting like Harlem belongs to you." There it was, not just disrespect, a public attempt to reduce him. Harlem waited for the sound of it, the sudden slap, the gun, the explosion. Men who had seen too many afternoons end in blood could almost predict it, the way the air turns before a storm. But Bumpy didn't move. He let the mouthpiece's words hang in the open. Exposed, ugly. He turned his head slightly, eyes traveling not to the enemy, but to the block itself, to the shopkeepers, to the mothers, to the men who worked honest jobs and still had to survive the same streets. It wasn't a plea for support. It was a reminder. This is who you are. This is who I am. This is who I am. This is who we protect. Then Bumpy spoke finally, and his voice didn't rise to meet the other man's volume. It stayed low, serious, controlled. "You talkin' loud," Bumpy said, "like you don't care who hears you." The mouthpiece laughed, a little too hard. "That's the point. Everybody should hear. Everybody should know you ain't the only name." Bumpy nodded once, slow, like he accepted the sentence. Not as truth, but as evidence. He took a step closer. Not aggressive, not hurried, just inevitable. The mouthpiece's men shifted their feet. Their hands didn't move, but their eyes did, checking angles, checking distance, realizing this wasn't going the way it was supposed to. Bumpy's gaze stayed on the mouthpiece. "I don't mind you saying my name," he said quietly. The crowd leaned in without meaning to. Bumpy continued, voice smooth as cold metal. "But you say it like you own it." The mouthpiece's grin started to crack. "What you gonna do about it? Here? In the street?" He spread his arms wide, inviting the witnesses, inviting the consequences to hesitate. Bumpy didn't answer right away. He let the silence do what silence does in Harlem, make everyone hear their own heartbeat. Then, he said, soft enough that the mouthpiece had to lean in to catch it. "You picked noon," Bumpy murmured, "because you think daylight is protection." A pause. Bumpy's eyes held him like a grip. "Daylight just means," he finished, "more people gonna remember what happens." The street went still. Not because violence arrived. Because something colder did. A promise made without shouting. The mouthpiece held his grin like a shield, but it didn't fit anymore. He tried to laugh it off, tried to make the block his stage again. "You talk pretty," he said. "Still don't change the facts." Bumpy didn't flinch. He didn't glance at the two men behind him. He didn't search for an escape. He didn't scan for a weapon like a nervous boy. He just stood there, close enough now that the mouthpiece could see it. No heat in his eyes, no panic, just control. Bumpy reached out and took the folded paper from the man's hand, not snatching it, not yanking it, taking it the way you take something that already belongs to you. He unfolded it slowly. The crowd watched the paper like it was a gun. Bumpy read it without expression. A neat list of percentages and territories, times, routes, names that didn't live on this block but wanted to own it. He looked up. "Who wrote this?" he asked. The mouthpiece lifted his chin. "Men with sense." Bumpy nodded, as if he respected the attempt. Then he turned slightly, holding the paper where the nearest people could see it. "You see this?" Bumpy said. Not loud, but clear. The words carried anyway. Harlem knew how to listen. "This ain't peace." He tapped the page once. "This is a bill." A man near the storefront swallowed. A woman's hand tightened on her bag. Even the rivals' men blinked, because Bumpy was doing something they didn't prepare for. He wasn't fighting the mouthpiece. He was putting him on trial. Bumpy turned back to the man. "You came out here," he said, calm as a priest, "to embarrass me." The mouthpiece scoffed, but it sounded forced now. "Came out here to correct you." Bumpy's eyes didn't change. "Correction is quiet," he replied. "What you doin' is performin'." That word hit the block like a slap. Performing. It turned the mouthpiece into what he truly was. A loud man asking strangers to witness his courage. The mouthpiece's cheeks tightened. "You think you can shame me?" Bumpy let the silence answer first. Then he folded the paper back up with slow precision and placed it against the man's chest, pressing it there with 2 fingers. Not hard, just enough to make the message physical. "This, your plan," Bumpy said softly. "You keep it." The mouthpiece tried to step back, but he couldn't without looking weak, so he stood there, trapped inside his own pride. Bumpy's voice dropped lower, so only the men closest would truly hear it. And because they had to lean in, it felt like the whole street leaned with them. "You want Harlem," Bumpy murmured. "You don't start by disrespecting it." His eyes moved not to the mouthpiece's face, but past him, toward the block again. "As long as these people gotta live here," he said, steady and final. "No outsider writes their rules." The mouthpiece swallowed. His men shifted again, unsure. The crowd didn't cheer. Harlem didn't celebrate like that. Harlem witnessed, and witnessing was enough. Bumpy stepped back, giving the man space to breathe, space to retreat, space to live if he chose to take it. Then Bumpy delivered the line that ended the argument without raising his voice. "Tell your bosses," he said, "if they want my answer, they can come hear it themselves. No gunfire, no shouting, just the sudden understanding that a line had been drawn, and Bumpy Johnson didn't draw lines twice." By sundown, Harlem had already retold it 100 ways, not with excitement, with certainty. A barber leaned close to a customer and said, "He ain't even raise his voice," like that was the part that mattered most. A shopkeeper spoke it behind his counter, eyes steady. "That's how you know he real." Even the boys on the corner repeated it softer than before, like saying Bumpy's name too loudly might summon him. The mouthpiece didn't come back down that block. Neither did the men who sent him, because something had happened that didn't leave a body but left a boundary. Bumpy's power wasn't in what he took, it was in what he refused to let be taken. That night, doors closed a little easier. Storefronts felt less hunted. A woman carrying groceries walked past a corner without tightening her grip. Harlem didn't become safe, it became steadier. There's a difference, and the neighborhood knew it. And Bumpy? He didn't celebrate. A man like him didn't need applause. He needed the community standing upright. He needed the streets to remember a principle, not a spectacle. So his name kept traveling through alleys, through barber shops, through prayer circles and backroom tables, not as a threat of chaos, as a warning of order, because the feared name in Harlem wasn't feared for how loud it could get. It was feared for how quiet it could make everyone else.